You probably grew up believing that logic is your greatest ally, that clear reasoning and systematic analysis are the keys to navigating the modern world. Perhaps you're one of those people who proudly considers yourself rational, who makes decisions based on data, who trusts numbers more than emotions. If so, I need to share with you a reality that may sound disturbing. This approach, which has served us so well for centuries, is rapidly becoming not only insufficient, but potentially harmful. We live on the threshold of a cognitive transformation, as profound as the agricultural revolution or the industrial revolution, and those who continue to depend exclusively on Cartesian logic will find themselves in an increasingly vulnerable and irrelevant position. The situation is already unfolding around us, even though we may not yet be fully aware of its magnitude. Consider for a moment how you make important decisions in your professional or personal life. You probably gather information, analyze pros and cons, maybe make spreadsheets or lists, research relevant data, and then reach a logical conclusion. This process, which seems so natural and correct, is being simultaneously replicated and surpassed by artificial systems at a speed and scale that makes our human analytical capacity almost obsolete. While you spend hours or days analyzing a complex decision, algorithms have already processed millions of similar variables and reached conclusions that, statistically speaking, have a higher probability of success than yours. But here lies the first paradox of our era. As machines become supremely logical, human value migrates precisely to what is not logical, to those dimensions of experience that transcend algorithmic processing. We are entering a period where intuition, creativity, emotional intelligence, and the ability to navigate ambiguities will become the most valuable competencies, while pure analytical capacity becomes a commodity available to anyone with access to a smartphone. This transformation is not simply a technological change, it is a revolution in the very nature of what it means to think and decide. To understand the depth of this change, we need to step back and examine how we came to value logic so much in the first place. During the last 3 centuries, since the Enlightenment, we have built our entire modern civilization on the premise that rational and scientific thought is superior to other forms of knowledge. Descartes taught us to doubt everything except what we can prove logically. The scientific revolution showed us that measurement, experimentation, and systematic analysis can unveil the secrets of the universe. The Industrial Revolution transformed these principles into machines and processes that exponentially multiplied our productive capacity. This success story of logic is undeniable and extraordinary. It gave us modern medicine, technology, transportation, global communication, and practically every aspect of the modern world we consider valuable, but it also created a kind of cultural addiction to rationality, a belief that there is always a right answer to be found through sufficiently rigorous analysis, that complex problems can be decomposed into smaller parts and solved systematically, that emotions and intuitions are obstacles to clear thinking that should be minimized or eliminated. This mentality shaped not only our approach to technical problems, but also our understanding of fundamental human questions. We applied business logic to relationships, quantifiable metrics to well-being, optimization algorithms to life decisions. We transformed education into a system of measurable inputs and outputs, medicine into standardized protocols, politics into electoral data analysis. And for a long time, this seemed not only sensible, but almost morally superior, a natural evolution of humanity toward greater rationality and less superstition. However, something fundamental changed in recent years and will dramatically accelerate until 2026. Artificial intelligence has not only matched our logical capacity in many areas, but has overwhelmingly surpassed it. An AI system can analyze patterns in amounts of data that would take decades for a human to process, can consider thousands of variables simultaneously, can detect subtle correlations that completely escape human perception. More importantly, it can do all this without fatigue, without emotional bias, without the cognitive limitations that affect human thinking. The result is that we are rapidly reaching a point where delegating purely logical thinking to machines is not only possible, but economically inevitable. Why pay a human financial analyst to make market predictions when an algorithm can analyze much more data, much faster, with much more accuracy? Why rely on human medical diagnoses when AI systems can correlate symptoms with millions of historical cases instantly? Why depend on human strategic planning when simulation models can test thousands of scenarios in minutes? This replacement of human logic with artificial processing creates a profound existential vacuum for those whose identity and self-worth are founded on the ability to think analytically. If your primary contribution to the world is your ability to solve problems logically, analyze complex situations, and reach rational conclusions, you are essentially competing with systems that do this better, faster, and cheaper than you ever could. But here we arrive at the heart of the paradox that defines our era. Precisely when machines become supreme in logic, we discover that logic alone was never sufficient for navigating the human condition. The most important problems we face as individuals and as a society are not problems that can be solved through pure analysis. How to find meaning and purpose in life, how to build authentic and lasting relationships, how to navigate complex ethical questions where different values conflict, how to deal with the fundamental uncertainty of existence, how to create art that touches the human soul, how to inspire others to seek the best in themselves. These questions not only resist logical solution, they require forms of intelligence that are fundamentally different from algorithmic processing. They require empathy, intuition, creativity, emotional wisdom, the ability to tolerate ambiguity and operate in domains where there is no single right answer. They demand what we can call synthetic intelligence, the ability to integrate multiple perspectives and forms of knowledge into a holistic understanding that transcends any purely rational analysis. I want to pause for a moment to ask you directly, have you ever felt that your purely logical approach to life's problems sometimes leaves you feeling empty or lost? Those moments when you analyzed a situation perfectly, reached the most rational conclusion, but still something seems to be missing? I know many of us were taught to ignore these sensations, to see them as weaknesses or distractions from clear thinking. But perhaps these sensations are signals that our mind is trying to tell us something important about the limits of pure logic. If you recognize this experience, share in the comments. I feel that logic alone is not enough when, and complete with your experience, your honesty may help others realize they are not alone in this search for something beyond pure rationality. The transformation that is coming is not just about replacing human jobs with machines, although that will certainly happen. It is about a fundamental shift in the nature of human value. We are transitioning from an era where human value was associated with the ability to process information and solve problems, to an era where human value is associated with the ability to create meaning, generate connection, and navigate the emotional and existential complexity of life. This shift is already manifesting in subtle but perceptible ways. Observe how the most successful companies today are not those with the best data analysis algorithms, but those that manage to create emotional connections with their customers. Observe how the most effective leaders are not those with the greatest analytical capabilities, but those who can inspire, motivate, and unite people around shared visions. Observe how the most satisfying relationships are not those based on logical compatibility, but those characterized by mutual understanding, empathy, and deep emotional connection. Technology is forcing us to rediscover aspects of human intelligence that were marginalized during our 3-century obsession with rationality. We are being compelled to recognize that intuition is not the opposite of logic, but a more sophisticated form of processing that integrates conscious and unconscious information in ways that transcend linear analysis. We are learning that creativity is not a decorative luxury, but a fundamental capacity to imagine solutions that do not exist within the parameters of known problems. We are discovering that emotional intelligence is not an optional interpersonal skill, but an essential form of cognition for navigating the complexity of the human world. The irony is profound. To remain relevant in a world dominated by artificial intelligence, we need to become more fully human, not less. We need to cultivate precisely those capacities that the rationalist tradition taught us to suppress. We need to learn to trust our intuition while maintaining our analytical capacity to embrace ambiguity while seeking clarity, to integrate emotion and reason instead of seeing them as opposites. But this transition is profoundly challenging for those of us who were formed in the logical tradition. It is like asking someone who has spent their entire life walking to learn to fly. It requires not only learning new skills, but fundamentally restructuring our understanding of what constitutes valid knowledge and effective thinking. It requires humility to recognize that our rational approach, however sophisticated, captures only a fraction of human reality. The year 2026 represents a tipping point because it is when many of these trends will converge in a qualitative, not just quantitative change. It is when AI systems will reach a level of sophistication that will make their superiority in purely analytical tasks undeniable. It is when automation will expand not only to manual work, but to cognitive work in a way that will fundamentally transform the job market. It is when the generation that grew up with digital technology will reach leadership positions and implement radically different ways of organizing work and society. More importantly, 2026 is when the cumulative effects of digital transformation will become psychologically and socially inescapable. It will be impossible to ignore that we live in a fundamentally different world, where the rules that governed human success for centuries have not only changed, but inverted, where the ability to remain open to uncertainty will become more valuable than the ability to eliminate uncertainty, where the skill of asking profound questions will become more important than the ability to provide quick answers, where the capacity to integrate multiple perspectives will become more crucial than the ability to defend a logical position. For those who recognize this transformation and begin to adapt now, the future offers extraordinary possibilities. Imagine a world where you no longer need to spend mental energy on routine analytical tasks, where you can delegate all logical processing to artificial systems and dedicate your unique human intelligence to questions of meaning, creativity, and connection. Imagine being able to collaborate with artificial intelligence not as a competitor, but as a partner, where machines handle the analysis and you focus on insight, vision, and synthesis. But for those who insist on continuing to compete with machines on their own terrain, who cling to the illusion that purely rational thinking is sufficient, the future will be increasingly frustrating and marginalized. They will find themselves fighting battles they cannot win, trying to prove human value through criteria that inherently favor artificial systems. The question is not whether this transformation will happen. It is already underway. The question is whether you will choose to adapt proactively or be forced to adapt reactively. The question is whether you will recognize this change as an opportunity to become more fully human or see it as a threat to your current identity. This adaptation requires courage because it means abandoning comfortable certainties about what constitutes intelligence and value. It requires humility because it means recognizing that much of what we considered superior thinking was in fact just sophisticated processing that can be replicated by machines. It requires curiosity because it means exploring dimensions of human experience that we may have neglected or undervalued. But it also offers liberation. Liberation from the tyranny of always having to have the right answer, of having to justify everything logically, of having to suppress intuitions and emotions in the name of rationality. It offers the possibility of a more integrated and holistic way of being human, where logic and intuition, analysis and synthesis, reason and emotion work together instead of in opposition. The development of synthetic intelligence that our era demands is not a return to irrationality or an abandonment of critical thinking. It is an evolution toward a more sophisticated form of cognition that incorporates and transcends pure logic. It is learning to use logic as a powerful tool when appropriate, but not as the only valid form of knowledge. It is developing the wisdom to know when analysis is necessary and when intuition is more appropriate, when to break a problem into parts and when to perceive it as an integrated whole. This cognitive evolution cannot be rushed or forced, just as a child cannot be forced to mature psychologically before being ready. The development of synthetic intelligence requires time, practice, and patience. It requires experimentation with different ways of knowing and deciding. It requires tolerance for the discomfort of not knowing, for the anxiety of ambiguity, for the vulnerability of trusting in something beyond provable logic. But for those willing to embark on this journey, the rewards are extraordinary. They will discover a richness of human experience that was obscured by obsession with rationality. They will discover that intuition, far from being sloppy thinking, is often the most efficient way to integrate complex information. They will discover that creativity is not a mysterious talent, but a skill that can be cultivated. They will discover that emotional intelligence is not about being emotional, but about understanding the emotional dimensions of human experience with as much sophistication as we understand logical dimensions. The world that is emerging will favor those who can serve as bridges between different forms of knowledge, who can translate between logical and intuitive perspectives, who can integrate insights from multiple disciplines and wisdom traditions. It will favor those who can work with uncertainty without being paralyzed by it, who can maintain multiple perspectives simultaneously without needing to choose one as definitive, who can navigate complexity without trying to reduce it prematurely to simplicity. These individuals will become the new leaders, innovators, and problem solvers of our era, not because they possess superior analytical capabilities, but because they possess superior synthetic capabilities. Not because they can process more information, but because they can integrate information with wisdom, experience, and profound human insight. Preparation for this future cannot be done through more courses in logic or data analysis. It must be done through practices that develop different aspects of human intelligence. Meditation to cultivate awareness and intuition, art and literature to develop creativity and appreciation of beauty, deep relationships to develop emotional intelligence and empathy, exposure to different cultures and perspectives to develop cognitive flexibility, contemplative practices to develop the capacity to integrate multiple forms of knowledge. More fundamentally, it requires a shift in mentality from seeing knowledge as something to be possessed to seeing it as something to be experienced, from seeing problems as puzzles to be solved to seeing them as mysteries to be explored, from seeing uncertainty as a problem to be eliminated to seeing it as a space of possibility to be navigated. This transformation in the nature of human value will also transform our institutions and social structures. Educational systems that currently prioritize memorization and analysis will need to be reimagined to cultivate creativity, critical thinking, and emotional intelligence. Organizations that currently value efficiency and optimization will need to learn to value innovation, adaptability, and wisdom. Societies that currently measure success through quantitative metrics will need to develop more sophisticated ways of evaluating well-being and human flourishing. those who anticipate these changes and begin to develop the capacities that will be valued in the future will find extraordinary opportunities. They will position themselves not only to survive the transition, but to lead and shape the emerging world. They will discover that far from being a threat, artificial intelligence can be a powerful ally that frees them to focus on what is most human and valuable in their unique contributions. If these reflections have touched something you have been feeling, but perhaps have not been able to fully articulate, know that you are not alone in this journey of discovery. By joining our community, you will connect with others who are also navigating this fundamental transformation in the nature of knowledge and human value. Each week, we explore together these questions that define our era, seeking not only understanding, but practical wisdom for living more fully in a rapidly transforming world. This is not just an information channel, but a space for collective growth, where we can support each other in developing the capacities that will become essential in the coming years. Subscribe to continue this vital conversation about how to evolve our intelligence to remain relevant and fulfilled in a future where machines do the logic and humans do the magic. The year 2026 does not need to be devastating for anyone who chooses to evolve. It can be, instead, the beginning of an extraordinary period in human history, where we finally free ourselves from the tyranny of pure logic and discover richer and more integrated ways of thinking, feeling, and being in the world. The choice is ours, and the time to begin this transformation is now. The key issue is that democracy is based on trust, whereas dictatorship is based on terror. If you systematically destroy trust in institutions, destroy trust in the media, in academia, in the courts, and so forth, some people think that this is liberating the people from these institutions.
Right.
It's not. When you destroy all trust, the only thing that can still work is a dictatorship. Right. So this is what would-be dictators do. They systematically destroy trust. And the other thing to realize is that the vast majority of information is not truth. A key misconception, especially in places like Silicon Valley, is to equate information with truth. Most information is junk. Because, to write a truthful story, you need to invest a lot of time and effort and money in research and fact-checking, whereas fiction is very, very cheap.
How do you get to know your own mind? I practice Vipassana meditation. When I just began practicing, I became like this missionary. Everybody must go. And after some years of just, from empirical observation, it doesn't work. Yeah. It just doesn't work. Find out what works for you, and then whatever it is. It can be a different tradition of meditation. It can be therapy. It can be art, it can be sport, it can be going to the woods for a period, whatever works for you, and then invest in it. And it is, in many ways, the most important thing you can give yourself.
Yeah. It's usually the people who know how to weave a story that give orders to the people who merely know the facts. Suppose we want to build an atom bomb. You need to know some facts. If you don't know that E equals mc squared, you will not be able to build an atom bomb. But to build an atom bomb, you need something else. You need millions and millions of people to cooperate. Not just the physicists, but also the miners and builders and the farmers that feed all the physicists and engineers and miners and so forth. If you just tell them the facts of physics, look, E equals mc squared, now get to it, nobody would do it. It's not inspiring. You always need to tell them some kind of fiction. And the people who invent the fictions are far more powerful than the people who know the facts of physics.